the Lyre's Gospel. The rebel Bar Avo has been saved by the crowd and his fellow prisoner has been crucified. Years later, Bar Avo continues to fight against Roman oppression, a struggle that will have disastrous consequences. Hugo Spear and Stephanie Racine read The Lyre's Gospel by Naomi Alderman.
They gather more and more men to them. There is a point when they are particularly interested in healers and holy men. They want God with them. So they bring him, a man who worships that dead preacher, Yehoshua. His name is Gidon of Yaffo, and he is almost as old as Bar Avo, rangy and quietly fervent. He tells how Yehoshua died and rose again from the grave. "Did you see it?" says Bar Avo. "I have seen it in my heart," says Gidon of Yaffo. "That is not the same thing. And if the Messiah is come," says Bar Avo, "why does not the lion lie down with the lamb? Where is the great crack of doom that presages the end of the world and the final judgment of all mankind?" "These things will happen," says Gidon of Yaffo. "Before this generation has passed away, the Lord Messiah will return, and the temple will run red with blood." "That last," mutters Bar Avo to Isaac, the man who brought Gidon of Yaffo to him, "will surely happen, but we will make it happen." "Fellow," he asks, raising his voice, "will you take arms with us to fight the Roman scum?" Gidon shakes his head. "When our Lord returns, he will cleanse the earth himself." "Then you are of no use to me," says Bar Avo, and sends him on his way. Isaac says, "Romans as well as Jews are taking on this teaching." Bar Avo shrugs. "If Yehoshua ends by being loved in Rome, they will find a way to use him against us." And then it comes time for Bar Avo to do what perhaps he had always been destined to do. And it is morning, and it is evening, and it is 130 years since Rome first breached Jerusalem, and still she squats over the city, enforcing her will, enslaving the people, and something must be done. There is a storm the night they invade the temple. When the thunder begins to roll across the sky in almost ceaseless peals, and the rain lashes down and the wind screams, then they know that God has given them the cover they need. No one will hear them now. Up on the hill, the high priest Annas has looked out at the approaching storm and taken a message from it too. God is saying that no one will stir from their houses this night. The rain has given them a night of peace. "Tell your men to sleep," he says to the Levite head of the guards. And Annas takes to his own warm bed in the temple enclosure. At the gates of the outer courtyard of the temple, Bar Avo's men gather. They are sodden already. The team at the gate is headed by Isaac. They bring out their saws. The saws shriek, metal biting metal. It could not have been done on any other night. A single howling cut would have wakened a dozen men from the deepest slumber. A lone guard makes his solitary round of the ramparts at the top of the temple wall. They press themselves into the shadows as he passes. Soon enough, one bar is free. Then another. Then another. Isaac squeezes through the gap, then the others, carrying their swords now openly in their hands. They walk towards the guard's gatehouse. Isaac boldly places his ear to the door, listens for a moment, and then they burst in, swords drawn. They slay one man before he has even been able to look around. There are more deaths. When they have taken the inner courtyard, Bar Avo comes, a warm fur robe around him, and 4 strong men by his side. He is an old man, but still commands the respect he did in the prime of his life. They enter the chamber of Annas. When he sees who is there, he begins to shake. Bar Avo hits him across the face. It is not a hard blow, but the high priest turns very white. "What do you want?" says Annas. Bar Avo smiles. "Just to talk, high priest." They have the usual dance. Bar-Avo flatters, suggesting that the high priest has a great deal of influence with the people, and that a speech from him could convince them to fight against the Romans. If every man in this nation took up swords against them, says Bar-Avo, they could not stand against us. United, we cannot be defeated. Ananus shakes his head. There will come a better day than this. God has promised us this land. Don't you think it's for him to fulfill his promises in the way he sees fit? The storm whips up again, and around Ananus's little chamber, because God is angry with the land, though Ananus does not know how he could have done differently. He is calling out loudly for his guards as they approach, although he knows his guards are dead. Bar-Avo touches the spot on the man's forehead, between the eyes. I dedicate your death to God, says Bar-Avo. And he remembers the crowd shouting, Barabbas, Barabbas, Barabbas. There is that Roman game called One of Two Will Die, and the crowd will decide which. If that game had fallen out the other way round, he would not be here now to complete this task. And that other man, Yehoshua, would have continued his own curious work. And Bar-Avo does not play that Roman game. It is he who decides who will live and who will die. And Bar-Avo puts the knife to Ananus's throat and bleeds him like a lamb.
There is a way to break a city, if a city needs to be broken. First, encircle the city with a great host of men. The people of Jerusalem had killed the high priest whom Rome had set over them. Once Rome owns a city, that city cannot simply declare that it is free. It has to be retaken, with such force that the news will echo around the world. Titus, the son of the Emperor Vespasian, was dispatched, therefore, with a force of 72,000 men. Second, see that no man can leave or come into the city. Even if the city is encircled by men, you must take care to guard the high mountain passes and the places that seem impassable. Allow no food in, no wagons delivering grain. It will be a slow process. Hunger takes a long time to build. Then it is wise to build a high wall around the city. Hunger makes men desperate and mad. Do not underestimate your enemy, however. The Jews were cunning. They dug tunnels under the wall and hollowed out the earth under the soldiers' platforms, propping them up with timber. They set the timber struts on fire, and the platforms suddenly collapsed, and pure flames burst through the ground and consumed them utterly. Do not be concerned about setbacks, however. Batter the walls, of course, night and day. You will prevail, for Rome always prevails. This is the whole of the law. And the first stone fell. The soldiers swarmed into the city and began to kill, for they had waited a long time. And they came at last to the Holy of Holies in the very heart of the temple, where the richest prizes of gold were, as they had been promised. They stopped then, amazed. And one man, seeing the veil across the inner sanctuary ripped away, pulled a burning timber from the hand of his friend and threw it like a javelin into the holiest place in the world. The old wood and the dry cloth caught fire almost at once. And in the whole of Jerusalem there was a wailing, keening cry, as of a woman who was woken in the morning to find her child dead. Time continued, of course. The Jews did not cease to rebel, nor did the Romans cease to smite them. And in time, a new god rose in Rome. And although one might say this was the triumph of the Jews, this Jew god risen to a high place in Roman esteem, nonetheless, by the time he arrived there, he was no longer a Jew at all. for it was evident to all that the destruction of Jerusalem must be a message from the God of the Jews. The new God, the crucified king, provided an explanation. The Jews had angered their God by rejecting his true emissary. Storytellers know that every story is at least partly a lie. Every story could be told in 4 different ways, or 40, or 4,000. Every emphasis or omission is a kind of lie, shaping a moment to make a point. So when, between 35 and 70 years after Yehoshua's death, Mark, and then Matthew, and then Luke the compiler, and then John the theologian came to tell their stories, it was as well for them to exonerate the Romans, who ruled the empire they lived in, and to blame the Jews, whose wickedness had clearly caused the destruction of their holy city. It was as well for them to add that Yehoshua had predicted that the temple would fall, that the city would fall. Nothing happened without a reason. Every story has an author, some teller of lies. Once upon a time there was a man, Yehoshua, whose name the Romans changed to Jesus, for that sat more easily on their tongues. He became, like Caesar, the son of a god. Like the god Tammuz, it was said he died and rose again. Like Perseus, he was born of a woman who had never known a man. He was turned into a god, and certain things were lost, and certain things were added. And when one peels away the gilding, and the plaster and the paint that were applied to him, what remains? So much of what he said he took from the Torah of the Jews. Love your neighbor as yourself is an old Jewish ideal. But Yehoshua was unique, in his time and place, for saying, love your enemy. It is a dreamer's doctrine, visionary, astonishing, and a hard road in times of war and occupation. If all involved had listened to those words, matters would have fallen out quite differently. But perhaps the idea was too difficult, for it is not much observed, even to this day. And so the temple burned. The walls of Jerusalem fell. The people were scattered into exile. And they took with them their unusual stubbornness and their distinct ways. And a book walked those same paths, from synagogue to synagogue at first, telling a tale of how miraculous one man had been, and how evil those who rejected him were, and therefore bringing good news for some, and bad for others. This was how it ended. And all the sorrow that came after followed from this.
Stephanie Racine and Hugo Spear were reading The Lyre's Gospel by Naomi Alderman. The music was arranged and performed by Michael Levy. The novel was abridged by Sally Marmion, and the producer was Emma Harding.